Hi all, it's me, Aki from Bring Forth. This is set 74, part 1. I'm going to make another for 73, but I'm going to add one for 74. And I'd like to discuss why it appears to some people that the left has lost its mind, and why some people think that the left-wing and right-wing paradigm, especially with regard to the gender policy, is a little off. It seems that the right wing is phobic about new genders, and the left wing is embracing genderlessness in a way that is really odd. And I'd like to shine some light on this from my own perspective. To me, it seems that the left wing is mostly about the future. They are a future-oriented people. They don't like to live in the present moment. They like to live in what can be described as the utopia of the future. That is the long-term historical character of the left wing, and the right wing seems to want to live in the future or even possibly the past, while the left almost always doesn't want to live in the past and is very, I think the word is reticent to the past, to living in the past and admitting its own mistakes. They are very reluctant to admit their own mistakes. And this is fairly easily noticeable when you observe the left-right paradigm, that the left wing is fairly devoted to staying in the future, and the right wing is fairly devoted to staying in the present or in the past. So if you want a better future, you usually vote left wing, and if you want a better current moment, you usually vote right wing, and that is the way it works. So the left wing is aware that in the future, not now but in the future, we can make organ transplants, specifically uterus transplants, that actually work. That you can make a uterine transplant to a male and have that male grow a fetus to full term and then give it birth. Now, from a medical standpoint, a person, or rather a person's femininity or femaleness, is perhaps only defined by its ability to carry children. So once the uterus transplants are possible and you can actually give birth as a man, and then you are, with very clear definition, a female. You are a woman. Now, that is currently not available. The uterus transplant technology has not been attempted in humans to grow a fetus to full term, but the technology to do so is only a few years away. So the left is focusing on this. They are making strong attempts to know and for people to understand that in a few years we can make a uterus transplant to a male to female transgender person, and that person will be able to grow children to full term. So the gender definition of being born a female or being born a male will be a thing of the past. We already have the ability to make human semen or sperm from a skin cell, but this has, as far as I know of, not been attempted to be used in humans to make a baby grow full term, but it has been successful in animal trials to make a child. So in a few years we will be able to make babies as a man, and a man that has transformed into a woman. So from the standpoint of the left, we are talking about a few years. We're not even talking about a decade for this to be attempted by someone. And this is the reality the left lives in. The right lives in the reality where this is still a fantasy and this is not the current moment, and the people doing gender transactions or gender transformations are ill or unable to comprehend the reality of what they are doing. Both sides, in my opinion, are respectable. I understand their points of view, but the reality is that as long as there is a demand, and there will be a demand, there will be somebody who supplies that demand. So in a fairly short period of time, we will see a male that has transformed into a woman give birth to a full-grown baby. This is not something that we can stop as a society, so there is nothing we can do about it. So things like these are the cause of the left-right divide in the US and in some parts of the West. We are unable to fully appreciate how fast technology grows if we live in the moment, and in the future point of view where we live in the future, we are unable to fully comprehend how difficult it is for people living in the present moment to understand that technology is really going to do this, that this is what we are going to do. So genders will become fluid, and there will be a lot more than two genders, because people will actually use technology to make sure that they are gender specific, or their interactions only happen within the background of the genders that they choose to respect or choose to interact with. So there is nothing that can be done about this. This is the reality of the future. So historically, as I said, the defining attribute of a woman is the ability to carry a child to term. So once this transformation is possible, it is nearly certain that somebody will do so. We will see a person that is born into a male body and transforms into a female body and gives birth to a child. So there is very little at that moment that we can do to call the person a male anymore. So that is their choice. This is, to an outside observer who doesn't understand the Western political discourse, a minor issue, but it is at the core of the Western split of the left and the right. They simply do not talk to each other. It is like seeing a parent who is completely against something trying to talk to a child that is completely endorsing that something. It is painful to watch because it is so opposite to each other. They simply do not talk to each other about this. So in my opinion, I have been on the fence about this for a while, and I am fairly sure that the left will win in this particular conversation. They don't win everyone, and this is a conversation that they will probably win. There is very little reason to say that the right's view of there being only two genders will be salvageable after these kinds of technological breakthroughs. We will eventually see human and animal hybrids and a lot of other things like that, but that is not for the present discussion. This is something that the left has veered away from, similarly to children. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing that they have tried to stay away from the topic of human-animal hybridization or voting rights for the children, but it is something that they will have to overcome eventually. So while the left focuses on the breeding question, the right would win this debate easily by adding voting rights to groups that are currently disenfranchised, such as tourists, children, or prisoners and people of that nature. Because in the US, committing a serious crime removes your right to vote, which is something that can be, in my opinion, called a travesty because that is a way to disenfranchise a large part of your population, and it is not a good thing to do. So that is what I wanted to say. This should give you some view or some understanding of what the left and right are talking about. The right wing is claiming that people who speak of more than two genders are essentially insane, and the left is saying that the right is essentially insane because they don't understand that in very near future we will be able to do transgender babies. And that is a split that is very difficult to heal because they are so entrenched in their position. That is what I wanted to say. The other thing I wanted to discuss is, why do people in the modern era so dislike Jews and Israel? Now, outside of the historic hatred for the Jews, which is strong and sometimes rooted in fallacy, sometimes rooted in fact, the modern hatred for the Jews rises nearly completely from the failure of Israel to settle the Palestinian question. And this hatred is boosted by the fact that Israel has a nuclear arsenal that it refuses to publicly acknowledge, as well as a nuclear arsenal that is targeted at Western major civilian centers. This is called the Samson option, where Israel has officially stated that if they, more or less officially, that if they ever lose Israel as a state completely, they will use their nuclear arsenal to strike out at the European major civilian centers and capitals. So, in short, nobody likes a nuclear armed bully. So the hatred for Israel and the Jews in the modern era is no more than the hatred for America or Israel or Russia or China or India. It is the hatred for a nuclear power holding the rest of the world captive. So the hatred for Israel and the Jews in the modern era is somewhat blown out of proportion because it is hatred for a nuclear bully. Israel has officially stated that it needs to be like a mad dog to avoid another Holocaust, so they are consciously making the choice to have a nuclear arsenal and to point it at the capitals of the Western powers and to hold the Western powers as much as they can in hostage. This is a thing that will lead to hatred of Israel and of the Jews, but this is a bargain that Israel as a state is willing to make. So there is very little that can be said about it. The policy is such that it probably won't change, and it will probably continue to be in its modern form. Israel will probably not dismantle its nuclear arsenal and its Samson option, but this question of Israel and the Jews was a question where I was on the fence for a long time. I was unsure which side was right. But as I read the Samson option texts and what they were saying, I realized that there is no way that I could support Israel, just as there is no way I could support Russia, no way that I could support China or India or Pakistan or USA. This is a thing that I cannot overlook. Saying that you will destroy civilian centers with nuclear fire if you are ever to lose a war is a thing that I cannot overlook. It is flat out saying that you will get what you want or you will kill civilians. This is, in the words of the meme culture, a cool story, but it is still murder. So this is the way it is in my view. So that is roughly when I decided that I would be against Israel in its modern political incarnation. I'm not going to make it a strong case, and I would support them in a defensive war, but as long as they have their nuclear arsenal pointed at the civilian centers of other countries, and they are saying that they will use their nuclear arsenal against other countries if they lose a war, even if those countries have nothing to do with the war, to me is a political stance that I cannot support. This is my personal opinion of why most of the world population that chooses to dislike the Jews actually dislikes the Jews in the modern era. The historic reasons have been buried under so much blood from both sides that nobody really cares. It's not a big deal for anyone that the Jews have this opinion and the Westerners have this opinion, and so on and so on. But the Samson option is something that is true in the modern era. It is true now. And there is no way to avoid it. That Israel has said that they will destroy the capitals of the Western world if they lose a war, even if those countries have nothing to do with the war. So there is no way that I could support such a state. For comparison, I also think that nuking Hiroshima and Nagasaki was the moment the US lost its gleam as a fighter for the pure, and this is and will probably continue to be my opinion about the United States. So that is the two topics I wanted to discuss: the left-right split that makes no sense to most people, and I wanted to answer the question of why does everybody seem to hate the Jews. It is mostly a misunderstanding and blown out of proportion. Everybody doesn't hate the Jews. It is a misunderstanding and blown out of proportion. But of all the reasons in the modern era why somebody would hate the Jews, holding the Western powers at hostage and saying that you will destroy them with nuclear fire if they choose to disagree with you is a pretty big deal. So that is my opinion on this. That is basically all.